This is built as the top-of-the-line ITX board for Ryzen 7000, and it's a pretty decent board that I think unfortunately falls short in a couple key areas. So let's go over what you might want to know about this board. Welcome to Machines and More. So the ITX board landscape for Ryzen 7000 and Intel 12th, 13th gen is pretty dismal, and I'll probably make a video shortly discussing just that, but it is what it is. That there is a reason that I've waited to take a look at Ryzen 7000. This board, the Asus ROG Strix X670E ITX, is the current high-end ITX board for the AM5 socket. I haven't seen any X670 ITX boards, let alone X670E. At this point, you can really count the number of mainstream Ryzen 7000 ITX boards on one hand, and it really is quite sad. MSI B650, Gigabyte B650, Asus B650E, ASRock B650E, and this one, X670E. The X670E chipset is a top-level chipset for Zen 4. And it gives you access to 24 PCIe Gen 5 lanes. The biggest difference between this and the X670 or the B650 chipset, at least for an ITX board, is that the expansion slot in an X670E or B650E board will support Gen 5 speeds versus 4.0 speeds, which is actually quite sad too, because even an Intel B board like the Asus B660 ITX supports a Gen 5 card. For X670, you'll get 5.0 delegated to your NVMe drive, and for B650, 5.0 isn't even a guaranteed spec, although you might find a B650 board that gives you a Gen 5 NVMe drive. It's kind of a moot point for ITX anyhow, since unless you want B650 or B650E, this is your only option. And the other thing is, at this point in time, most users aren't going to notice the difference yet. And we are pretty early in the Gen 5 cycle to be planning for future compatibility just yet. So with that stage set, this is the latest and the greatest for ITX. Pretty beefy, but it's not quite as overbuilt as the Asus Z690i. Both the rear I/O heatsink and the M.2 heatsink, they're pretty tall, and they've got this very sculpted look. Now, I won't comment too much on the aesthetics of the board, but not all enthusiasts want a bold aesthetic such as this, but I'll leave it at that. 2 USB 4 ports that support up to 4K 60, 5 3.2 Gen 2 ports, 3 2.0 ports, and you've got 3.2 Gen 2C front panel connector and a 3.2 Gen 1 front panel header, 2.5G Ethernet, Wi-Fi 6E. Pretty standard I/O for a high-end ITX board these days, but you've also got this Hive device, which has your audio goodies, actually all of your audio goodies. It takes up a Gen 2 port at the back, but it also gives you back a 3.2 Gen 2 port and a 2.0 port. As mentioned, all the audio functions are delegated to this Hive device, which, good or bad, depends on the user, but it also means that if your case has an HD audio header, that's going to go unused. This Hive does have a quality ESS Sabre 9260Q DAC, so if you aren't already using an external DAC, it's kind of like you're getting one included in the price of the board, but you're also kind of being forced to buy this one, right? But just for reference, good ones, they can run upwards $100 or more, so this thing is totally fine with a gaming headset, but don't expect it to drive high impedance headphones. You're still going to want a dedicated headphone amp for those. The board also comes with an add-on or a riser card, which they call the FPS-II Card, and that gives you an additional 2 USB 2 headers. We'll talk a bit more about this one later on. So let's get to the good stuff first. Build quality on the board, it's very good. It's got an integrated rear I/O shield, which every board at this level should have nowadays. Back of the board doesn't have full shield. Not many ITX boards do, of course, but there is an additional heatsink / shield under the power delivery. Speaking of power delivery, it's very robust. 10 plus 2, 110 amp stages. You really should have no problem running any Ryzen 7000 CPU and probably 8000. So that's very good. I don't think there's any concern on the power delivery front. Board cooling handled by a small fan, so it is active cooling here. But it is pretty unobtrusive, and VRM or board temps really won't be a concern. No coil whine on this board, which is a big plus. Plenty of boards lately, I've been seeing that issue. Since it's an ITX board, you got 2 DDR5 DIMMs up to 6400 megahertz, which is technically an OC for Ryzen 7000, and I did experiment with clocking my test RAM kit. I was able to get this Kingston test kit, which is a 5600 C40 kit, up to 6000 megahertz stable at C40. Just a little boost, but it was pretty easy to do with this board. AM5 is now LGA or land grid array. CPU slots in here nicely. High quality mounts. Side note, the thermal paste guard from Noctua is highly recommended. Probably my favorite thing about this board is the layout of the fan and RGB headers. They are all aligned in a neat row on the top of the board. It's this way with most ITX boards from Asus, and it's something that I think Asus does really, really well. And this board even comes with covers for those fan headers if you're not using them. Nice touch. For you custom loopers, yes, this one does have that temp probe that's been removed from quite a few Asus boards lately. The header is right next to the sole front panel header, which is the power switch header, if you're not using the add-on FPS-II card, which will give you the remaining front panel headers. The M.2 heatsink is more than adequate here, though it is quite tall since both drives, one Gen 5 and one Gen 4 compatible, are stacked here. The width of the heatsink unit has been taken into consideration, so it will clear a tower cooler that's on the larger side like the Noctua U12A, unlike the Z690i board. I like the toolless mounting they've been doing on their recent boards as well. It's a nice touch. This board design will still interfere or restrict the orientations of some top-down coolers like the Noctua L12S or the Ghost S1. So while they may work, just take note of restrictions if you're planning on running a cooler like that. I tested this mainly in the T1 reference with the 7700X, also in the NCase M1. Operationally, provided the system was on and running, there were no issues, and it was absolutely great and solid for the 7700X. Boost clocks were all as expected and very stable. So you're probably wondering why I say on and running, because that gets us to the first hiccup that I experienced with this board. And yes, you should expect a long post time on your first boot with a lot of Ryzen 7000 systems. It has to do with memory training, but I'll tell you what, I waited 15 minutes to the first power on before I was like, oh, screw this. It was basically running the GPU fan at high speed the whole time, and it wasn't going anywhere, so I forced to restart, and probably a few minutes later it did go into BIOS successfully. What I didn't expect was how long each subsequent boot took after that, and feel free to skip over this part since I have a timestamp below, but I feel like this kind of behavior out of the box is unacceptable. In my experience, if you sleep your system, waking it sometimes takes just as long. An update to the latest BIOS did absolutely nothing for those post times, and I knew that it was training the memory because it was stuck on the DRAM light. And it wasn't until I started poking around the BIOS that I found the memory context restore setting that you have to set to enable instead of the default setting, which is auto. And enabling that setting reduces, but it doesn't completely eliminate the retraining. And in particular, I noticed that when the system is physically disconnected from the power source, it seems to want to retrain the memory again. Yeah, so if you move your system around a lot, you go to LAN parties, just know that that's totally going to happen. The silver lining to that setting is that your startup behavior, for the most part, it is vastly improved, so that it feels like it's more of a normal power on. But there really could have been more of a call out here from Asus on that, like a big sticker on the box or something like that. Next, at first I thought this Hive, it was kind of a cool gimmick. I mean, yeah, it's like an external audio device with volume control, but it turns out it's quite essential to the board working, right? Because your debug lights are on it, you saw that. in the post video. That way you can see how much time you're wasting with the memory training, right? But you can also set up the flex key to serve as a few different functions, like a restart button if you want it. But in order to update the BIOS, I had to use this Hive device, as the flashing within the BIOS didn't work for me. The Hive has to be connected to a dedicated port on the back of the board, and then your USB thumb drive containing the BIOS file has to be plugged into this USB 2.0 port, which is labeled BIOS, and then you press the BIOS button on here on this Hive to start that process. So it is a little bit clunky if you ask me. And if you're looking for a clean setup, with just your desktop, this isn't it, right? Yeah, it's magnetic and you might be able to attach it to your case, but it's still another device on your desk, but you might not mind that. That's not the only add-on device to run this board, right? Because that FPS-II card, it kind of also houses some essential functions as well, such as the other front panel headers. So if you want the full suite of your front panel headers, you got to run that, right? Otherwise, you just have to power switch. 2 SATA ports, which some of you can live without. If you're running more of a workstation, you might need those. USB 2, not a big deal unless your AIO needs it, but this is the one thing that gets me. The clear CMOS header that's on the add-on card. For a board that is targeted towards the enthusiast, who most likely is going to want a clear CMOS button handy, for a variety of reasons, such as a failed OC. They put it on the add-on card. For an enthusiast board, I think the BIOS flash port and the clear CMOS needs to be a button on the back of the board. And okay, maybe unlike me, you can live with those little things, except unlike the riser card on the X570 Crosshair Impact 8, which was in a more amenable location parallel to the expansion slot, this guy slots right under the 24-pin ATX power connector. And if you're building in an SFF case, you know how often that is an area of conflict with cables. If you just look at how it's set up in my M1 here, it's a little bit of an obstruction for cabling. And now you've got to get to that clear CMOS header every time, right? So imagine fully built up. I've got the card removed here so you can see it. And it's a shame because I really wanted to like this board. And in fact, in many ways, I do really like this board because of the power delivery, the build quality. In so many ways, it's the ideal board performance-wise for the ITX enthusiast that wants to run Ryzen 7000. However, you're being made to buy this external audio device here. A lot of you have one already. While this board itself, it has zilch for audio. And a lot of the Hive's functions are really nice to have for the board's day-to-day function. That FPS-II card, the startup post behavior, those logistical shortcomings, perhaps seemingly small, they can actually become headaches for ITX enthusiasts. For that reason, I can't fully recommend this board, especially since this is one of the most expensive ITX boards that I've tested, if not the most expensive ITX board. At around $450 US now, it's gonna have to be a lot more in tune with what SFF enthusiasts need. The X570 ITX was fine, and I also ran the DTX, the Crosshair 8 Impact version, for a while. Both were great, and I really wish the X670E board was closer to the thoughtfulness that was in those two boards. Things like the post codes on the back of the DTX board, quality of life things that make this nice. And yeah, I get that there's a lot of layout restrictions that are driving the decisions behind the board design here, but some of these decisions are downright head scratchers here. Anyhow, that's that. If you have this board, I'm curious what you think. If it seems like the sky is falling for mini-itx boards, I'm feeling a lot better about this one here, the MSI. So stay tuned, give a like if you found this helpful, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.